Salut tout le monde, comment ça va? Alors, I have wanted to do a video on the two infamous French pronouns en and y for the longest time. Bon, j'ai une bonne nouvelle pour vous. Today is the time. But instead of trying to cram everything I know into one video on both of these pronouns, I've decided to split it out into a series for you so that you can leave each video feeling like you have time to digest one topic before moving on to the next one. So today we're looking at en, and next week we'll be looking at y. So if you're ready, allez, c'est parti. If you've watched any of my videos before, you know that I like to break down the tricky French grammar into my native English so that you can have confidence in the logic behind the French and go off and build your own French sentences. So let's do that once more with this pronoun de pouvoir, this powerhouse of a pronoun, en. Now there are two main categories of object in French. There are the direct objects, or complément d'objet direct, and indirect objects, complément d'objet indirect, or COD and COI. Then you have the pronouns which replace these objects to make things easier to reduce repetition in sentences. So these are called the direct object pronouns and indirect object pronouns, or in French, pronom COD et pronom COI. Some pronouns can only replace direct objects and some pronouns can only replace indirect objects, but en can replace either, both, however you want to look at it, depending on the sentence itself. I'm not going to go any further into that part of the grammar today, but I just wanted to give you a bit of an outline depending on how you were coming into this video. Nice and easy to start off with. If there's one thing you take away from this video to help you figure out whether you need to use en or a different pronoun, remember that there is always de involved when you need en. If en has replaced something, then something that it replaced contained de. Wherever you see en used as a pronoun, it has replaced de. De represents different things depending on its role in a given sentence, but if you find it confusing to know what to replace with en, just remember there's always de involved. At least then you'll know if there's no de in the sentence you want to change, you know you don't need en. Well, you might do, but we're going to get into that a bit later in the video. D'abord, the first thing that de can represent is when it's combined with le, la, or les, it can create what we call in grammar a partitive article. That means it represents a partial or uncountable quantity, like some in English. For example, some tea is du thé. It's d plus le combined to make du. Alors, qui veut du thé?
Moi, j'en veux.
Ok, tiens, ça fait 2 euros.
Quoi?
So you saw in that example, qui veut du thé? Qui veut du thé? Who wants some tea? And one possible answer being, moi, j'en veux. So we could say in English, this translates to I want some. Nice and easy in this example because there's an English equivalent. But imagine that's a slightly different scene and I was already holding the kettle and a cup of tea in front of the other person. I don't need to say qui veut du thé, although I might do if I felt like it. I could directly say t'en veux, because it's obvious what that thing represented by en is. It's some tea. And just like with du thé, you could also have des chips. Je mange des chips, j'en mange, for example. So to sum up, when it's a partial quantity of something and we need the partitive article of du, de la, ou des, we can replace that whole thing with the noun with en. Des chips becomes en. Du thé becomes en. By the way, guys, if you want more videos like this, si t'en veux plus, click on that like button and subscribe so you don't miss next week's upcoming video on y. So that is the first form of de that can be replaced by en when it represents some. Now, when de isn't claiming to be a translation for some, it can also be a preposition. So when de is attached to a noun, like in the previous examples, it represents some or a partial quantity of that noun. But de can also be a preposition depending on the sentence, and over time you start to recognize when it is some and when it is a preposition. The fact is, some verbs require a preposition of de to follow them in the sentence. For example, parler de, to speak of or to speak about. If you want to express that in French, you need de following parler, just like we need about in English. It's a rule. If you follow de when it's a preposition with an article, like le, la, or les, like in the previous examples, the exact same thing happens. It still has to become du, de la, ou des. But instead of expressing a partial quantity, it's just simply combining de with the article of the noun because of the rule associated with that verb. So it can be a little confusing here if you try to analyze how du, de la, and des relate to the du, de la, and des of a previous example, because here it doesn't express a partial quantity. So just remember, when you have a verb that requires de follows it, then you're going to follow de plus whatever comes after it with en when you want to replace it with a pronoun. Oh, excusez-moi tout le monde. Quoi? Tu parles des pronoms en et y? Oui. Je suis en train d'en parler là. Sorry about that. So I was just asked, tu parles des pronoms en et y? And I replied, oui, je suis en train d'en parler. The first part was tu parles des pronoms en et y. Parler de became parler des pronoms parce que c'est les pronoms combined with de becomes des pronoms. And then to replace all of that bit after de, including de, becomes en and goes before parler in my response. Oui, je suis en train d'en parler. Now, when the thing following de is not a noun with an article of le, la, or les, then de simply remains unchanged and we add the rest of it to the end of the sentence. For example, je parle de deux pronoms difficiles. De. But you can see here, de remains unchanged, and if I was then to answer a question about it, I could say oui, j'en parle. Or oui, je suis en train d'en parler. Hopefully you see the pattern. Now, en is really powerful when the thing after de is super long. For example, est-ce que vous parlez de ce que vous allez m'offrir pour mon anniversaire? So after de is a really long part of the sentence, but because you're speaking about plus something that's all connected in that second clause, if that's the correct grammatical term, suddenly that can all be replaced by en. Oui, on est justement en train d'en parler, for example. It's the same if you want to follow de with a verb, for example. So, je parle de partir en vacances en janvier. It's the same. It's just the same as in English. I'm speaking about going away on holiday in January. J'en parle. By the way, if you're wondering about the order of this pronoun, where it goes in the sentence, then I did a video last week over on the channel talking exactly about the positions of these pronouns in standard sentences. So go ahead and check that out. A link will be down in the description if you want to watch it at the end of this one. Right, so now we're going to talk about something I mentioned briefly closer to the top of the video. Excusez-moi, je dois enlever ça parce que j'en ai marre. Il fait trop chaud. When you're talking about the quantity of something that you have or that there are, it's not so obvious where the de is in this equation, but it's there. Because verbs like vouloir and avoir, unlike the verb parler, don't require the preposition de, you don't see it in a full sentence. Nevertheless, En is still used to replace the noun in these situations. J'ai 4 enfants becomes j'en ai 4. But where's the deux? Où est le deux? Well, you wouldn't say j'en ai deux unless everyone involved in the interaction understood what en was replacing. The question that would lead to this answer that contains en has the secret that we're looking for. Something like t'as combien d'enfants? T'as combien d'enfants? Combien de or combien d'apostrophe if the next letter is a vowel. In questions about how much or how many, combien is always followed by de. So there's the de that we're looking for. So when you answer tu as combien d'enfants, you're replacing d'apostrophe enfant with the en and then the number afterwards. J'en ai would mean I have some, remember, but if we're talking about a specific countable noun like enfant, you still have to add in the number of children at the end. So j'en ai 4. If the sentence were simply j'en ai, you could assume that the question that provoked this answer was t'as des enfants? T'as des enfants? Notice the de, which has become des here. Do you have children? Do you have any children? Do you have some children? Not a specific quantity. So simply j'en ai would be an answer. But commonly, if someone asked you, do you have kids? You would also give the number, right? You wouldn't just say yes. You might do, but you could also just say yes, 2. So in French, you could also say oui, j'en ai 4, or oui, j'en ai 2, to match my English example. Or if you did choose to just answer with oui, then a follow-up question might come at you as ah, t'en as combien? Ah, t'en as combien? How many of them? Because en implies it's des enfants. How many of them? T'en as combien? And then you just say j'en ai 4 or j'en ai 2 or simply 4 or simply 2, but here we're talking about en, so I gave you the full answer. Now in this video so far we've had examples with vouloir and we've had examples with avoir, but what about that expression il y a for there is and there are? Well, it's the same here. You could say something like ah, regarde, il y a 3 chats là-bas. Il y a 3 chats là-bas. And then the other person comes along and says où ça? Là-bas, il y en a 3. Là-bas, il y en a 3. So because you previously mentioned the number of cats and what they were, you then don't need to repeat 3 cats, right? You can just say il y en a 3. Il y en a 3. And the person knows what en refers to. It's the cats you were talking about. But where's the de? Well, the closest I think I can get to that is imagine that the question is il y a des chats? Il y a des chats? So imagine the other person doesn't say, oh yeah, where? Ah oui? Où ça? They said, il y a des chats? And then you say, oui, oui, il y en a 3. So I think that's where the de is. Il y a des chats? So de is not always explicitly said, but it always plays a role. Whether it be an explicit partitive article, whether it be an explicit preposition, or whether it be hidden and implied from the context. One thing that should be noted after all this talk about en is that en never replaces de plus a person. It's always de plus anything else. Verb, object, thing. It's just never a person. There's a different rule for that and a different pronoun. Hence why I used de quelque chose earlier in the video rather than de quelqu'un, because that isn't possible if you want to replace it with en. Whew, that was a lot to talk about en, but I hope that all made sense. J'espère que c'est clair pour vous maintenant. I hope that I've maintained my reputation of being able to explain this stuff to you. If you would like something to keep, something that isn't in video form, something written down in black and white to remind you of everything that we talked about, click on the link down in the description below and you'll find that I've written up the important points and it's available for you as a free download via my website. So head to the description down below to get yours now. Remember to like and subscribe this video, guys, if you want to get that video next week on an explanation of y in French in a similar style. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all my channel supporters here on YouTube and over on Ko-fi. We are growing by the week. It is fantastic. So thank you very much for your support. Stay tuned for that video on Y to drop next week, guys. But in the meantime, if you want something else to watch that is related, check out this video I did a while ago on 8 common everyday verbs followed by de. And now you know en will be involved when replacing that de. And check out this video on the order of pronouns that I did last week. But until next time, merci beaucoup d'avoir regardé. À la prochaine. Ciao.